federal government should privatize Social Security. The affirmation we're going to define today's resolution is the United States federal government should privatize Social Security, meaning it's going to gradually lower taxes and institute the payroll tax cut to let people invest for their own Social Security in bank accounts. Basically, what this means is that, like currently, what the government does is that they have a payroll tax on your income, and that money goes into this huge like Social Security bubble where like you end up paying for people who are going to retire who are seniors. What you're paying is for the people who are seniors right now. But by privatizing Social Security, everyone has like their own account, meaning you start paying for your own Social Security when you get a job. And so what this is basically going to do is that, first of all, let me go over the tax. The funding is that it's not really going to be funding. We're just going to cut taxes and let people do this on their own by investing in their own bank accounts, and we're going to be gradually lowering these taxes. And the time frame is we're going to start this on January 1st, 2013, and the criteria is going to be net benefits to America. So whoever can provide tangible benefits to American citizens, or more of them, should win today's debate. So let me first go over some inherency. Currently, Social Security isn't going to last. In fact, many economists are saying that it's going to burst in 2017. There's multiple reasons why. First of all, it's because the baby boomers, they're retiring. And when baby boomers were born, there was far more, there were a lot of workers, but currently a lot of them are retiring now, and there's less people supporting Social Security. And so it's like, it's becoming like a pyramid where less people are supporting the people on the top. So what this is doing is that there isn't enough money in Social Security. Let me get to my text on the rest of POI. And so Social Security isn't going to last if this keeps going on like this. And another reason why it's not going to last is that it's being misused by politicians, because a lot of people, they're just taking, when politicians want to fund something like a war or like high-speed rail or something, they take money out of the Social Security fund in order to pay for this stuff. So what this is doing is just creating a system where there's more like loopholes and corruption and things like that, where the government is like, it has its hand in all everyday matters, and this is going to be bad, and we're going to be solving today's with our advantages. First, let me address your POI.
Sure. Do you have a specific source for the 2017 figure?
2017?
Yeah, you said that Social Security would become
we read it on several notable websites like CNBC, New York Times, New York Prep Time. But okay, so going into our advantages, our first advantage today is that this is going to save Social Security. All right, the problem with Social Security bursting is that people aren't going to get benefits. We've seen that like people, they've worked their entire lives and they've been taxed a lot, and a lot of the money they've been working very physically for is that it's going to go to a program that's going to burst, and that's not beneficial, because we as Americans, we want to get what we work for, and if something's going to burst, something we worked hard for, it doesn't make any sense. So by saving Social Security, we're going to be helping out Americans, because Americans will actually have benefits when they retire. And there's two sub-points under this. First, A, is that using the existing system, in order to save the existing system where like it's going into this huge trust fund, it's that we're going to have to make drastic cuts for benefits from Social Security. Like, you're not going to get as many benefits. But the thing with this is that this is bad, because people want their benefits. So a way to keep all the benefits we have currently with Social Security is to let people actually, like, you know, the money they earn and put into Social Security, they'll end up getting that back in their retirement. That money will be used by them. So instead of having to cut their benefits, just what they paid for. It's not like everybody gets an equal share of Social Security or anything. And the sub-point B is that politicians won't be able to take it away from the Social Security fund, because clearly if it's all like individual accounts, like if I'm paying for Social Security, if a politician wants to like start a war in Africa, then he won't be able to take money away from my account to start the war. And this is just going to reduce corruption, because the government won't be able to take money away from the ordinary Americans, because taking money away from ordinary Americans, Americans don't like that. So our first advantage was saving Social Security, but our second advantage today is that this is going to improve economic growth. Obviously, when you have people like investing their Social Security money into banks, this is going to be good, because if Social Security is privatized, people are going to deposit in a bank. When you deposit in a bank, you're basically investing your savings, and what banks do is that they provide loans to like people who want to start businesses, and this provides them with capital, and ultimately your money will get back to you. But in the process, it's helping out other people who want to start businesses, who use this capital to actually help out America, for long-term growth, meaning huge businesses will have the potential to start in America. We're currently seeing economic stagnation, and in order for America to achieve higher economic growth, we obviously need a system where people can get the capital to actually start businesses and let the future be made in America. And B is that this is going to, the sub-point B is that this is going to increase investment, jobs, and wages, because as we can clearly see, when people are actually going to be able to start businesses, there's going to be a higher number of jobs, wages are going to increase, so it's quite clearly that Social Security is going to actually improve economic growth. And our third contention today is that this is going to improve wealth. So currently what we're seeing in Social Security is that like poor people, like middle class or lower middle class Americans, people under the poverty line, they need every cent of their income to actually like stay alive. And actually be happy and provide their children with what they want. And they're being forced to pay into a fund in which they might not even get any benefits out of, in which like the money they're paying might go into war they don't even believe in or something. What's going to happen is that they're not going to have money in the future. And people need to have the ability to decide what they want to do in the future. And I'll be getting into that in my next intention. But what this is going to do is the poor people don't have to waste money on payroll taxes to provide for something that while they can use that money in the present day, like actually buy food and things that will affect them like in a shorter time frame. And so it's going to improve wealth because people are just going to have more money. And what this means is this is going to increase an impact off of this is that this is going to help themselves dig themselves out of poverty and increase and allow the economy to flourish because they'll have more money to invest in the economy. And our fourth and final contention today is that this is coherent with the American dream and liberty. Well, America is founded on a system of individualism, meaning people like you work for yourself. Meaning it's not like a socialist or communist state where everyone like community like works together. America, we're founded in the American dream where if you work hard, you can work like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You work by yourself. It's individualism. You pay for what you get. But Social Security is like a direct contradiction of that entire system because you're like putting everything together to one system where like a bunch of people are like sharing one thing together. And that's going to be bad because it's going against the American dream. And currently, because we're doing this in America, we need something that's feasible with like the entire American ideology. And another thing that was the American dream part, but the liberty part of this contention is that currently the problem is, say you're providing in Social Security for like your entire lifetime, and then before you reach retirement age, you suddenly die, like God forbid, because you die of like a heart attack. What happens is all the money provided for Social Security goes to the state. Like your family members don't get it. But if you have a private account, the money you provided for Social Security, you paid, even if you die, you're gonna it's gonna go to, you can transfer to your family members instead of having it just like disappear into the state and like going to people who you have no relation with, which obviously is against the American dream and individualism. So obviously you can see by affirming today's resolution, you're going to be helping out Social Security and really like helping out the American people the most. Thank you.
Judges ready?
Yeah.
More sentiments? As the leader of the opposition, I'd like to start off by thanking our opponents, my judges, as well as my partner for being over here and making this debate possible. So let's get right into it. We don't really have any contention with their definitions as well as their plan text. But first off, we take issue with all of their points, and to start off, I'd first like to refute all of them. So let's move on to their first point, basically, which is about how people won't get benefits. They somehow imply that the only way to ensure that people still get their benefits after 2017 is to somehow eliminate Social Security altogether, and simply privatize it. By privatization, meaning of course putting it into the hands of the people. So actually, we don't actually need to privatize and completely eliminate Social Security as it currently exists in order to ensure that it remains solvent and it makes it far more, and ensure that people still receive benefits. What we can do is reform Social Security in its current form and make it hemorrhage less money in order to ensure that people will continue getting their benefits. I have a counter plan about this, and I'll go over it later in my speech. And moving on to the second contention about how it's going to improve economic growth by allowing people to put their money into banks and allowing those banks to spread money through loans and so on and so forth. There's no guarantee that if people invest their money in banks, they will in fact get any better return than, let's say, if they invested in the government. As we can see through the financial crisis, in fact, there's no guarantee that banks, even ones as reputable as, say, Lehman Brothers, will actually ever have a return on any investment that they make. In fact, the way they paint Social Security is that it's a system whereby small politicians can simply take money out of the trust fund in any time that they want and simply use it for whatever they want. That is simply not true. Social Security money is in fact used to purchase T-bills, treasury bonds, which in fact, and the money that is gained from the purchase of treasury bonds are in fact used to fund other programs in the short term. However, the value of T-bills increases over time through interest. And so that is how Social Security operates in the long run. That is, it gains money in the form of interest that outstrips inflation. And for this reason, Social Security has remained solvent until 2010. Yes, it is going to stay in a deficit in the long run, but we also need to realize that that the private banks that have been invested in by private individuals will not always get a better return, and so there's not really any difference. They can't really paint banks as being better in this case. Furthermore, about their entire subpoint about economic growth and banks spreading money through loans and so on and so forth, there's no reason why this might actually happen. As of right now, businesses are in fact sitting on a huge pile of cash. Corporations are sitting on several $1 trillion of unused money. It's basically not being invested in the economy. The fact is, what's happening in the United States right now is a lack of consumer demand. Businesses are afraid of the fact that people aren't buying stuff, they aren't buying goods, and therefore they simply don't want to invest in the economy simply because there's no demand for any kind of goods and services. And so their entire point about people starting businesses through the form of loans is simply moved because the consumer demand in the economy right now is simply so dismal that people simply don't want to start businesses, and banks aren't going to want to give out loans in this climate. Moving on to the third point about how it's going to improve the wealth of poor people. We see a complete contradiction over here. If poor people are in fact spending the money that they gain from not having paid payroll taxes, and so are simply spending it on basic necessities such as survival, food, so on and so forth, how are they in fact going to invest it on their own? They're not going to be able to invest it at all. What they're simply going to do is spend it all, and simply in the long run not going to have any money for retirement. It's either having the money that you have from Social Security or not having any money at all. In the case of poor people, they're going to be completely left in the dark in this case, because they won't have any mechanism, they won't have the actual advice that they need and that the government provides in order to invest their money wisely. And so Social Security, in fact, gives them a crucial lifeline to save for their retirement. If you simply eliminate this program and as it is funded by the government, you simply rely on private enterprise of poor people to make the decision in this case, and they're simply going to want to spend it on necessities, as my opponents have already said. And they spend it all, they're simply not going to have that money in the long run, they're simply not going to have that money in the retirement. You're going to see a lot of poor old people who are in fact not as well off than when they were younger, and they simply don't have any kind of money to spend in their old age. And it's simply going to be a burden on society in the form of increased welfare payments and increased societal ills. So now moving on to that fourth point about liberty in the American dream. This has nothing really to do with net benefits. The net benefits, as is usually understood, is utilitarianism, the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. So as they define it, liberty, freedom, the American dream, doesn't really have any bearing on net benefits. What we need to look at over here is the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. That is, people who benefit from our two teams' different versions of reality and our different plans. And so when they really talk about the liberty of the American dream, it doesn't really tie in with anything at all. Furthermore, when they talk about how if people die, their money simply goes to the government and they don't get back any money at all, that is simply false. That's completely false. If when you die, your Social Security money in fact goes to your family. It doesn't in fact get absorbed by the government. That's completely false. And furthermore, at the same time, going by your logic, if the government were to in fact get its hands out of every aspect of people's lives, give them unlimited liberty, we would in fact not have a government at all. Why have a government? I mean, we would simply not be criminalizing homicide, for instance, because government was regulating that. People should have the liberty to kill other people. I mean, you in fact propose the privatization of Medicare. By going by your logic, government should really not do anything for the economy at all. And we'd be going back to the 1920s where robber barons controlled all of America and people really had no benefits at all whatsoever. Moving on to our own case proper, first I'd like to present a counterplan. A counterplan is basically to make Social Security solvent in the long run by reforming it. So, I mean, in instances of reforming it might include raising the retirement age, lowering cost of living adjustments, and basically reducing benefits somewhat, but at the same time also increasing Social Security's lifespan to ensure that everyone has an equal chance for a comfortable retirement. Now, first contention is basically the privatization would in fact lead to a huge loss of money. I already went over this in one of my rebuttals. Basically, that there's no guarantee that banks or private banks, in fact, will be able to provide a good return on people's investments. Basically, if you invest money on banks basically want to make a profit. The government, however, is accountable and beholden to the people only. And basically, the government, in fact, has an incentive to make sure that people get the benefits that they were promised. People and bankers are basically only beholden to their shareholders and basically just want to make a profit. And so, as you can see, through the financial crisis, banks are far from foolproof. They can make bad decisions as well and lose their money. Banks also have no regulations that prevent them from making risky investments, and that make it far more likely that money that people invest through the form of retirement is in fact going to be lost. Protected time, sorry. I'll take a question at the end if I have time. Okay. And furthermore, this in fact ties into my second point about accountability. Basically, like I've already said, the government is in fact accountable to the people. Banks in fact are simply only accountable to shareholders and people who actually have a stake in them. But banks at the same time are also profit-driven. If they make money, all they want to do is simply make money. In government, politicians actually just want to get votes. So basically, they're going to want to ensure that Social Security remains solvent, is able to provide the benefits that people have been promised. Moving on to our third contention, if in fact we encourage private enterprise, in fact only make the banking industry stronger and give it more of an incentive to lobby Congress to ensure that to ensure that this scale of privatization were in fact continued, because they want more money in their bank. They basically want more money to be invested in by private people, and they basically have a vested interest in ensuring that Congress enacted this policy because it benefits them so much more. They get more money in their deposit accounts, and so for all these reasons, you really need to vote in favor of litigation.
It's not a question. It just, can you tagline your advantages for the counterplan? Like, just go through what they are. Like, just the first line of them. I know the first one was huge loss of money. Second was accountability. Did I miss any, or were those?
Oh, the third one is private banks' influences over government.
Okay. Okay, so brief off-time roadmap. Thanks to everyone here. I'm just going to go counterplan and then back to our own case. Okay, the reason why you can't count their counterplan to today's debate is because the lack of specificity of their counterplan. Let's take a look at their counterplan. Their text was, we would raise the retirement age or we would cut benefits, but they were very vague. They just gave us this big list. They didn't give us a number of where they'd raise the retirement age. They didn't tell us where they would cut the benefits. They just made these vague generalizations like, oh, we're going to raise the retirement age and cut programs. But we as the affirmation really have no way to attack this, because what if we say raising the retirement age is bad? But then they said we're not going to raise it this high, or we're going to actually raise it this high, or then they say something about we're not cutting these benefits. This gives the affirmation with less ground to debate on their counterplan specifically, because we don't know exactly what they're cutting. We don't know exactly how high their retirement age is going. We don't know exactly what their counterplan's text is. So you can't really buy their counterplan at all, because it's so unspecific that we can't even negate, refute their counterplan. Like, what if I said, right now, workers would get too old, but then they said, we're just going to raise the retirement age 1 year. What am I really supposed to do about that? They've been so vague with their counterplan that we can't even count it in today's debate. But let's just say for the sake of the debate, we will count it. So let me tell you why raising the retirement age is bad. If we raise the retirement age, first of all, many workers like police officers, firefighters, many of these workers who work in physically demanding jobs in manufacturers and laborers, and since they weren't specific, they can't really come up here and say anything about it because they provided no specificity. So you're pretty much going to be buying whatever I'm going to be saying about the counterplan, since we were given nothing specific to work with. So like people like the firefighters, cops and all those people who have those physically demanding jobs, they're going to have to retire later, and this is going to be bad because this could ultimately deteriorate their health, and they enjoy Social Security much for less years, and they would also may have a worse time because they could get injured during their job. If they're too old to work, it's going to be much harder for them to work, and we don't know how much they're going to raise the age. So we really have no way to really refute any of these things. So I urge you, because of that, don't count the counterplan. They gave you no time frame, they gave you no funding, they gave you nothing really specific, but they gave you these two advantages, but we don't really know what their plan is. And also, if we raise the retirement age, less people can get jobs. The people who are coming out of college and all those different things, the jobs will continue to be filled. What we have right now with Social Security is once people move on to retire, those jobs can be filled by people coming in. People coming into the workforce can fill those jobs. If they raise the retirement age, we don't know how many years, let's say 10, those people have a harder time finding jobs and our unemployment rate will go up. So that's the disadvantage with their counterplan. But I urge you not to count it because the lack of specificity gives us really no ground to debate, because they can twist it any way they want and urge a neg or get a neg ballot. So really, when you look at this case, they really just have the refutations to our plan, but that's not why our plan is bad. They didn't really come up with huge disadvantages. They never really said why our plan is bad. So let me go into our plan. Our first plan was, my partner said it's going to save Social Security. It's going to help Americans have benefits. They pretty much said we can just reform it to have less hemorrhage than we do now. But I just told you, they're not really telling us how we're going to reform it. They just gave these vague things that we can't really debate on. So you can't even take their first refutation to our first contention. It goes through, I mean, we can flow our contention through. So we are going to be saving Social Security. We're going to help Americans get benefits from time on, and we're going to help them get benefits. So you're going to be voting for the act just based on that, because we're ensuring that Social Security will be here for years to come, which is something that they can't ensure. Since they have no counterplan, our plan automatically has a risk of offense. If you vote for us, our plan will pass, and there's a chance good things happen. If you vote for them, we stick with the status quo pretty much, and we're just going to lead into more turmoil where eventually the Social Security system will burst. Going on into our second contention, we said it's going to improve economic growth. Their main response to this was, Well, you're not going to be so, you might not get the same money from the bank. The thing is, you're more likely to gain more money by investing it in the bank. You're more likely to. If you invest in the government, you're not going to be as likely to get more money than before. So because we have a greater probability, you're going to be voting for us by that. They pretty much conceded, well, it might not happen, but that's just defense. But even though they say it might not happen, there's still a chance it could happen, and that means we have a risk of offense, so you can vote for us there. Also, they said, like, but politicians won't, like, politicians use the money, but politicians use the money for a lot of things, and we're not saying what they use it for is bad, because they brought up all these T-bills and stuff, but the thing is, it's just the very idea that politicians can use this money that might make Social Security not existent in the future if they step their bounds and they use too much money. It could hurt the Social Security system is what we're saying. But just the idea that politicians can take money from here to use it for something else and if things don't work out, it's just the idea that the American people have to be assured of their Social Security. And that's what we're here to ensure on the affirmation side today, that it's going to be here in the long term. So going on into the third contention about improving wealth. So what actually it's going to do is they will be improving wealth. It will be improving wealth today because my partner explained how in these private accounts we have a bigger and greater chance of getting more money from these things. We're having an increased likelihood of getting money from these accounts that we have. And my partner also brought up how privatizing helps the poor, and they said actually they're just going to be still going to be poor in the future. And they also said like the money goes to the family. This is not true. In today, how it is, if someone dies, the money is not going to go directly to the family. The money is in this big pool. That person's their Social Security. It's not going to go to the next family member. That's why our plan is so critical, because we're going to allow, even if you're buying like everything they're saying there, we're still getting that advantage flow through. The money is still going to be going to the family, which is going to be very important. Going into our fourth one about liberty, we said it improves individual liberty, and my partner talked about how it helps with the American ideals and stuff like this, and working hard, how America was founded on this, and people bring themselves up by their own bootstraps. They said this is not good for net benefits, but the thing is, what this does is the government looks better in the eyes of the people. The people have renewed faith in the American dream. They say, hey, we can come to America, and America is a place where we can work hard by ourselves, and we can make it big like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and all those big business type. You know, you can come to America, and it reinforces the American dream that you can come to America, work hard, and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Then they came up with this absurd argument. They said because we want to privatize Social Security, we might as well privatize everything. He came up here and said, let's privatize Medicare and Medicaid. But we never said that. Just because we want to privatize one thing doesn't mean we want to go privatizing everything. You can't let them make that generalization, Judge. That's just because I said privatizing NASA would be a benefit. But just because I want to privatize NASA, why would I want to privatize everything else? You can't let them make this. You can't let them make this statement. You know, it's completely ludicrous and false. So don't buy it. So here's how the round breaks down. We have advantages. They said our advantages might not work, but that's not a reason why they're specifically bad. Their counterplan is too unspecific to rely on, and for all these reasons, it's going to be a clean affirmative ballot. Thank you.
So this is going to be fun, quite a bit of stuff to cover. Before I begin the timed contents of my speech, I'm basically going to be outlining what I'm actually going to be doing throughout my speech. So first of all, I'm going to be talking about my opponent's problems with the counterplan, which basically subsumes the majority of my partners and my arguments. Then we're going to be going over specifics that my opponents had, the specific problems that my opponents had with my partners and my argument. And then lastly, I'm going to be going over refutations of my opponent's points. So moving on basically to the most important part of really today's debate, which is that my opponents are arguing that the counterplan is not specific enough because we did not give a specific age to which to increase the retirement age. The fact is that although my opponent said that it was 2017, a statistic that we found from Aaron Bernstein's Social Security, basically an article published in Business Week, said that it's more likely to be in 2037. But even more importantly than that, if we look at my opponent's argument, what he's saying is that because we're not telling you an exact retirement age that we're going to set it to, you have to basically ignore the entirety of our argument, and that is completely ridiculous. The point about Parley debate is the fact that we don't have 7 like 7 years to prepare. We don't have the time to come up with all of these brand new statistics. We can't fund basically research into this. Basically, the entire point of the 20 minutes of prep that we have is to make it it a little bit more general than if we were to tell you, if you do this, we will make exactly $20 billion if we raise the retirement age, it will fix everything. Basically, what my partner and I are arguing is that we need to look at reforms to the system rather than simply privatization. Yes?
Wouldn't you agree if you don't set like just a specific age, we are losing out on places to poke holes in your case?
You have found places to poke holes. You have found places to poke holes, and I think that you are perfectly fair in finding places to poke holes.
But, no.
Yes. Anyway, continuing on. Basically, what my opponents are trying to argue is that we should completely privatize and that basically no reform should be taken. What we are saying is that reform is indeed necessary in the better system. Now, my opponent's counter-arguments to my partner's first point, which is basically that it will cost an extra $1 trillion to $2 trillion to privatize the current social security system. My opponent's counter-argument to this is basically the fact that they don't see our counter-plan as being good enough. They don't see the counter-plan as being effective at basically countering my opponent's, basically, they don't see the counter-plan as being solvent. Whereas the fact is that you need to see the counter-plan as being solvent, because otherwise you're just giving the round to my opponents because we weren't capable of giving you a specific retirement age. The fact is that my partner and I can't possibly know everything about everything that ever happens, and the fact is that yes, sometimes we can't be specific. My opponents, on the other hand, during their plan, they said something along the lines of, we will gradually decrease taxes, we will gradually, well, the fact is that although they gave a specific date for the time that it would start, they didn't give a specific time frame for the entirety of their plan. We didn't call them out on this. Why? Because you're allowed to have some amount of generalization. Yes?
Alright, so if you have 20 minutes of prep time to figure out the specifics of one counterplan, you can't do that. Why run the counterplan in the first place?
Because the fact is that those basically 20 minutes isn't by anybody's definition enough time to go through the exact, process through which you would need to figure out every single little bit of statistics. The fact is that in that case you guys shouldn't be running a plan, because I'm sure you guys weren't capable of going over every single statistic, every single relevant piece of information. But moving on, my opponents completely failed to refute and basically failed to mention my partner's third point, which is basically about the political influence that banks will be able to have over Congress and the political, basically the influence that big corporate institutions will have. The fact is that my opponent didn't even address this point in the slightest. He said that we only had two disadvantages, whereas the fact is that this third disadvantage about the political influence that financial institutions would have is pretty much essential, because the fact is that the prison lobby within California, when we privatized for the prison system, the prison lobby all of a sudden started lobbying the California Senate and started trying to get more and more money into the system. The exact same thing would happen if we were to privatize Social Security. Big banks would basically start lobbying Congress in order to basically have more money going in. But moving on basically to my opponent's, a couple of my opponent's arguments. The first one being that cops and firemen would have to work until they were older. The fact is that if cops and firemen, they have a different system than governmental employees as a whole have a different system than do private employees. They have an entirely different system that is based off of not only their counties, but also their states. So the fact is that when my opponent says that cops and firemen will have to work longer, the fact is that basically this is entirely reliant on the specific Social Security programs, which are individual by state and county. But moving on to my opponent's second argument, which is basically about the fact that increasing the retirement age is bad because it will cause people to be unemployed. The fact is that new jobs are being created all the time, and even though we are in an economic slump right now, new jobs will be created in the future, and raising the retirement age will actually make it so that basically all the jobs are being filled and maximum productivity will be achieved, instead of wasting the potential of new college graduates on waiting on tables. Basically, by raising the retirement age, we give young people a chance to go into new and developing fields, rather than simply taking the place of their grandparents. But moving on to my opponent's first argument, which is basically that they get to save Social Security. First of all, this isn't entirely true. They're not actually saving Social Security, they're just completely getting rid of it. Privatizing Social Security basically means that everybody's in charge of their own affairs. It's not really saving Social Security. But the most important part of that is, first of all, the fact that they argued that politicians can get access to the pool of money from which this Social Security comes from. And the fact is that this, as my partner specifically stated, is absolutely false. Politicians do not have the right to access the pool of money which is used to fund Social Security. The entirety of this Social Security fund is spent on buying T-bills. These T-bills mature over time. They gain interest over time, and the fact is that politicians do not have the ability to simply reach into this pool of money and pull out money as necessary. The fact is that my opponents completely failed to address the point that my partner made on this fact. But even more, but also my opponents also made the point that basically cutting Social Security would be bad and basically all of these lovely things. But the fact is that Social Security as we know it would cease to exist if we privatized it. Yes.
Wait, like, how can you guys say that what we're saying is false about, like, politicians can't pull money out of the Social Security Trust Fund, when part of Obama's entire 2008 campaign was about that, about abolishing that practice?
The fact is that this isn't actually a practice. This is basically it's a misconstruction by a lot of people. What happens is the Social Security system buys treasury bills, which effectively gives the government money. But the fact is that this means that the government will have to pay back these treasury bonds. Anyway, moving on to basically my opponent's second point, which is about depositing in banks. First of all, my opponents failed to talk about whether this would be commercial banks or investment banks. And the fact is that there's a huge difference between these two types of financial institutions. If you were to put your money into a regular commercial bank, you would actually be losing money because the rate of interest is lower than the rate of inflation. So the fact is that nobody would actually be doing that. What they would be doing is risking their money in such banks as Lehman Brothers, these investment banks, these shadow banks, and basically this would actually mean that a large amount of people would lose their money in times of economic crisis, such as the one we're having right now. On the other hand, Social Security is stable. Social Security allows us to be able to know that we will get paid back later. My opponent's third point is basically about the fact that, that we are arguing about a slippery slope. The fact is that NASA is completely different than Social Security. NASA does not interfere with the rights and liberties of individuals, and their point about that was completely irrelevant. And for all these reasons and more, you should vote for the negation. Thank you.
So wait, just before you go, are we allowed questions? Because I've been hearing different things all day. Like, I don't know if we can do questions in this.
Sure, if you want to do questions of the, oh, you mean points of information during the.
Yeah, like, I don't know what I've been hearing. Like, what is the rules? What is the, because I don't know.
As far as I know, it's basic NFL and CFL rules.
Basic NFL rules allow questions.
Okay.
So I will go with that.
One group said you can't ask questions, or the last minute is guarded.
Do you guys want me to call Thomas real quick, just to verify?
I would just assume it's basic.
I don't really care too much. Like,
Yeah.
Alright, so.
Do you guys want to do questions?
Vikram?
I don't particularly get that.
Alright. I mean, it's all completely up to you.
POIs and rebuttals, but no points of order.
Wait, no points of order?
CFL rules don't have points of order.
Yeah, no points of order, sadly.
Okay, so I guess just questions.
Just POIs,
Just
yeah.
questions, right?
So yeah.
I don't know if you're going you.
So yeah, you'll know if we're going these. So. Okay.
So as the final speaker for the negation team, I'm going to make us all take a step back and examine this debate in its entirety. We have 3 voter issues to show you why the negation team should win today's debate. So let's jump right into it. The first voter issue is obviously the counterplan, and the specificity of the counterplan as opposed to the plan. Now, as my partner mentioned, the affirmation team in today's debate never really specified by how much and to what extent they'd be reducing taxes and completely eliminating taxes, or payroll taxes rather, and what time frame in fact they'd be using to completely eliminate government-funded Social Security as we know it. So basically, they weren't particularly specific on that either, and we don't really have any kind of. We don't really have any ground to attack them on that because we don't really know any of the details. And the same thing, they really bring, and we chose not to contest it. They bring the charge against us. We are somehow not specific enough by not talking about how much money we will be recouping through our proposed reforms. Just because of the retirement age, we simply cannot give this vote to the affirmation. Because in our 20 minutes of prep time, we cannot possibly think of every single contingent possibility or detail that might need to be included in our counterplan. And so for this reason, their entire contention with our counterplan about it not being specific enough is completely bogus because it simply fails to take into account the fact that we simply cannot know every single detail that's needed to ensure that the counterplan has the required level of detail as required by the affirmation team. And so this counterplan should in fact be allowed to stand in today's debate, and it needs to play a crucial part in ensuring that you in fact vote in today's round. Now moving on to our second contention the second voter issue rather, about the value of Social Security itself and really what Social Security is all about. They basically talk about how they're saving Social Security by privatizing it and making people invest by themselves. As my partner said, that is an incredibly risky proposition. Because people are in fact not going to be investing their money in commercial banks, rather they're going to be putting their money in high-risk institutions that in fact provide a substantial return on people's investments. Banks like Lehman Brothers and JP Morgan, which Lehman Brothers, as we all know, lost a huge amount of money and went bankrupt in the 2007 financial crisis. JP Morgan recently lost $4 billion. And it's an extremely high risk business. And basically when people put their money in these accounts, the fact is there's a small chance they might get more money, but there's a far higher chance of them losing money, simply because risk correlates with return in investment banking. So we make people put their money in these investment banks. It's basically a far higher risk investment than say the T-bills and Social Security money is invested in. So basically, when they talk about how they're saving Social Security, they're not really saving Social Security. What they are simply doing is simply making it far more riskier and making it less likely that people will in fact have money to receive money when they are older. And so we need to keep Social Security in its present form and reform it to make it more viable, make it more available for future generations. Not simply put it in the hands of investment banks that are far more riskier and far less certain that they will in fact provide any return to any of America's consumers. And moving on to basically on our side, in fact, we are far more sensible on this count, because we in fact tell you that because the government is in fact accountable to the people, and in fact needs to pay out the benefit that it has promised to the people because it is elected in by the people. It basically has far more accountability and far more incentive to ensure that people in fact have the money that they were promised when they paid payroll taxes. And finally, and on the third contention, they basically talk a lot about how it's going to improve the wealth of poor people. Like we've already said, they haven't actually addressed this directly, but again, when poor people spend all of their money on necessities because they're getting more money from payroll tax cuts, again, they're not really going to be investing more money into investment banks because they just simply don't have the money. They need the money to survive for food, as they say. They're simply not going to be investing the money in, say, JP Morgan Chase. So basically, they won't have any money for retirement in the long run. Yes, please.
All right. So if a person doesn't have to pay for like the trust fund for Social Security and they're getting payroll tax cuts, isn't a poor person having more money? So wouldn't they have money to invest? Isn't this like self-explanatory?
Yes, but I mean, in the end, like I said, commercial banks are far less risky and they don't provide any kind of return at all, but at the same time, investment banks are far more riskier. And even then, even though poor people might not pay as much money, will still be in a small amount of money, they won't be able to invest as reliably as say the government will. They simply don't have the resources and financial know-how to invest as reliably as the government will. And so basically this entire point about what Social Security really does, that is, ensure that people have a secure retirement, they really fail because they're simply going to make it far more riskier and far less likely that people will in fact get any kind of money from Social Security. Moving on to a third contention, which is basically about the role of government and liberty. They talk a lot about liberty in the last contention, which is basically about the American dream and so on and so forth. A, this does not really relate to net benefits. And B, at the same time, they simply talk about in vague terms about how people will be inspired to work hard. The fact is, people do work hard, even whether or not there's Social Security. There isn't really any correlation over here. But at the same time, people in fact need a certain source of stability. People are simply losing all their money in investment banks. That isn't really net benefits, is it? We, on the other hand, are far more able to ensure liberty and liberty from starvation and the verities of a terrible retirement, because Social Security, in fact, provides a stable lifeline, and it's been doing so for almost 80 years. And so they really fail to show how this, in fact, achieves anything. And so for these three voter issues, you need to vote neg on today's resolution. Thank you.
The major reason why they lose today's debate is because of the counterplan. The problem with the counterplan is because of the funding. We already went over this. The problem is they keep on saying that they're being specific enough. Well, quite clearly they're not being specific enough. Let's first compare both of our plans. In our plan, you get a specific date. You specifically get that we're going to be eliminating governments like Social Security. We have specifics there. Under their plan, let me quote him. Let me quote him in his first speech. He said, "We might be raising taxes. We might be raising the retirement age." He said, "We might be doing this. We might be doing that." Clearly, he's very unspecific. The problem is they're saying that their second speaker came up and said, "You guys have found adequate places to poke holes in an argument." Well, that doesn't really make any sense, because let's compare like the places where both of us can poke holes. They can poke holes on our specificity because we actually have specificity, and they can poke holes at our actual plan. Whereas we only have the ability to poke holes on their plan. That's going to be abusive because they obviously have more grounds to poke holes in our arguments. In parliamentary debate, you have to have equal amount of grounds for like debate to actually occur, because debate has to be fair. The reason why they're being abusive, we can clearly say, as we can see today, is that because they're not being specific, we can come up and say, look, if you raise the retirement age by 15 years, you're going to incur all these harms. But they can come up in their next speech and say, we're not going to be raising by 15, we're going to be raising by 2. Obviously, being unspecific, we're not able to make those arguments to their plan. And so you're not going to be voting on this type of counterplan. And the second reason why you're not going to be voting on this type of counterplan is you don't vote on unspecific things like this. The fact of the matter is they're being very untransparent. You don't vote on untransparent things. Picture us in like Congress or something. If government has to propose a plan, it has to be specific. It has to be transparent. When they're being vague, you don't pass a vague sort of plan, because vague plans don't. They're harmful and abusive. They allow more corruption. So basically, by being vague, you can't really like get buy their counterplan, because they can shift whatever they want whenever they want. And and they didn't even respond to things about how raising retirement age would be bad, raising taxes would be bad because people would hate it. So basically, you have to buy the funding spec. You just have to drop their counterplan. It doesn't make any sense. So once you drop the counterplan, all you have left is that they have three. Before you drop the counterplan, let's say you do buy the counterplan, they have three advantages. Excuse me, let me go back. You drop the counterplan, they have three disadvantages. One is that where there's going to be a huge loss of money. Well, they haven't really explained it at all, because if you actually think about it, we have a huge loss of money when government takes money out of like Social Security to fund for like wars and stuff. That's a bigger loss of money. They haven't even like, there's huge holes in their arguments. They haven't even addressed this stuff. The second one they said is accountability to the people, but the gangs will still stop. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you limit deficit spending from Social Security, people have more consumer confidence because the government's like, it has a higher ability. So basically, people, they'll be more confident in like the America's economy. And also, Americans are pretty distrustful of the government. Our government's pretty unaccountable too. So it might be better to invest in a bank than putting into like some government subsidized trust. And also the third one was about private banks having influences over government. They didn't attach any voters to this at all, saying why this is bad. So you can't even consider this in today's round because they didn't say why this is bad at all. So now you're left with four advantages on our plan. First is that save Social Security. They said there's an alternative way. Well, quite clearly they tried to propose one and they failed, so that flows through. We're the only side that's protecting Social Security, allowing it to continue and actually helping out Americans. And the second advantage was that this is going to improve economic growth. They said that there's no insurance, that government or banks are going to they're not good enough. Well, we still have like the FDIC, which monitors banks, and also the second response is that there's also a lack of accountability on the part of the government. So like, as we already said repeatedly throughout this entire debate, like the government also does. Are there POIs?
Yes, there are POIs. That's what we decided, right?
Oh yeah, my bad. Yeah.
Alright, so does the FDIC, would people be putting their money into commercial or into investment banks? Because the FDIC only monitors commercial banks. Alright,
we're saying like, if you go to like Wells Fargo or something and you want to start a Social Security fund, then you can put your money there. That's what we're saying. The FDIC can, like it's a bank regulating thing. And also there's a lack of, going back into this, there's also a lack of accountability on the part of the government and Social Security funds, which you already said, how the government takes money out of Social Security fund for other things. And the third thing was that the improved wealth of poor people. And I just addressed this in a POI, but if you're instituting payroll taxes, the poor people will obviously have more money. So they'll have more money, they'll be able to spend for actually, buying things that they need, and also they'll have money, help stimulate the government, or stimulate the economy. So you're going to get improved wealth for poor people, and this is going to help them actually buy food and live a better and substantial life. And the fourth one is American liberty. The only American dream, the only response they had to this was that this was not relevant because of net benefits. Well, of course this is relevant to net benefits. We're an American. People are distrustful of the government, and by actually allowing this and actually letting them do what they want, like actually start Social Security fund if they want, and if they don't have to, people have more faith in the government because they realize that these things are their choice, and they have more choices in America. They're not forced to do something. This isn't like a state, like a fascist state. They can do whatever they want. And obviously this is a huge benefit because the American people have a better mentality, and this is the American dream. The liberty part that we talked about, that was like the only thing they responded to on that entire thing was the American dream part. They didn't even address the liberty part, flowed through this. So obviously we're winning today because their counterplan, it has no specificity, and that was abusive. But even if you drop that, we're still winning on like because our affirmative plan is way better than the status quo. Thank you.